So in a recent article written by Matt Lowe, who is the design director at the finals, we got a deep dive into the changes that will elevate the cash out tournament mode with a focus on rewarding things such as, let's say, efficiency, team communication, strategy, and map awareness. Basically just like elements that obviously are found in most successful competitive titles. But here's something that Embark hasn't actually directly communicated to you. The finals is getting very, very close to its true, I'm going to call it competitive 1.0 launch. You could obviously ask, for example, well, hey, THiiXY, why hasn't Embark pushed for esports yet? But I guess like the simple answer was is just that the game wasn't ready. Launching esports, I'd kind of say like prematurely, especially if we went back to Season 1. I mean, we didn't even have, you guys know if you were there, you didn't have a spectator mode even in the game at the time. So, you know, those basic tools were still missing. And obviously, you know, if they did launch, let's say, an esport mode back then, I think it would have actually have been a disaster completely. Now, obviously, if you've been playing the finals as long as me, you and me will probably nod our heads and agree that ranked play is not there yet, right? However, but it reaching a solid, you know, balanced state, a fair state, is a massive step forward, and it's kind of like a tug of war that Embark have been trying to do since Season 1. But once that ranked system is in a good place, if let's say you might not be into ranked, maybe you're a casual player as well, well, resources can then shift towards developing other areas of the game, like, for example, new modes for casual players. That's why maybe a new mode hasn't been released, because they've been so stretched in building other things. Obviously, they have the new map and new weapons for Season 4. This is a really nice article, by the way, that they've written. This is actually something that I wish they did more of. If you guys don't know, third-partying in the finals is pretty annoying. It's basically when two teams would be fighting over an objective, and then another team would essentially swoop in and take the advantage of it, cleaning up, let's say, the last players who were on cooldowns for their gadgets and specializations, for an example. And this was obviously frustrating. I think if you were with me in Season 1 and Season 2, I was a solo player for the game, and it was just very, very difficult, because the finals actually has, you're like 50% more likely to win a game if you're in a call with 3 players. You're squadding up together, and if you're third partying and you're a solo player, it's very, very difficult, because all that hard-earned work that you did in the game could just be easily countered by a player stepping in at the right time who are actually having effective communications. And obviously, if you're watching this and you're a top player, you could obviously be, you know, led back in your chair and be like, well, you know, it's just, you need to just get good, because the simple solution is something like pacing. That's an easy solution to third partying. But this is actually why I've had conversations with players, for example, at the time, like THiiXY and NetX on my podcast series that I do. And even though obviously their squads have, I would say, the mechanical skill to beat almost anyone, especially in pubs, the issue goes deeper beyond the individual experience. It's really about, I guess, the overall journey of a player. I think when people think of ranked, they think of top 500 in the world, diamond, like grinding at the top, but that's not actually what ranked is necessarily for as well. Ranked is also there to give a fair match to all players, or at least as close to a fair match as they can, right? There's obviously limits that you can go to this thing. So you actually have to take into consideration bronze matches as well. Bronze matches are just important for the player experience as a diamond match, and I think players kind of forget that as well. So if we actually take that information, and it doesn't matter where you are in terms of skill, you still have players that can make the wrong decision and unintentionally go into a third-party fight, right? Because there isn't a game-limiting, you know, boundary or border that stops players from doing it. If a team wanted to, they could only third-party the whole game. So obviously I'm skipping over like a ton of useful information, so the article is actually going to be in the description. But one of the big things that has changed that I didn't mention in my last video is the fact that Embark have changed the spawn points by, they say, making them smarter, so that basically teams are less likely to get third-partied at the starting stages of the game. And I actually think this is pretty good. I kind of like that. Of course, you know, it doesn't, again, as I said earlier, it doesn't eliminate it, because you know, there's no physical boundary. Inexperienced players could just go for a third party, or actually there could be a strategy that rewards only third partying in the early game too. But my point is that nothing's physically stopping it. So we get this chart right here which shows that before the changes, only about 40 to 60% of fights involved just 2 teams. Now after the update and this new change, look at that, it's massive. It's 85 to 90% of first wave fights, and now the team versus team instead of third partying, which is basically meaning there's less chaos and obviously more focused, fairer gameplay. Again, this is so sick that we get to see this data, right? I really like this, Embark, that you guys actually did this, because what I love seeing is how small changes affect data on the bigger scale, right? So obviously we had adjustments to heavy recently, and there was a new addition to having an extra second on the still timer, right? For the cash outs, it went from 6 seconds to 7 seconds now, and this resulted in nearly a 10% change to cash outs being left. They say unclaimed here, but I think that means like attempted, like, you know, someone might attempt to steal, but they didn't do it. So basically successfully defended cash outs is what they're saying here. But overall, less cash outs are being stolen. So this is really damn cool. And another interesting site here is the breakdown between the controversial changes to team wipe penalties, right? We had this massive discussion on why Embark essentially removed the team wipe penalties. So Embark's data here actually show that matches were closer when there was no team wipe penalty. And if you guys remember, I did call and said I don't feel like that was the right decision. I feel like team wiping penalties has to be in the game. So obviously, you know, you could see here that, yeah, sure, maybe Embark was right, but I don't actually think that it's as simple as they made it out in this article. And the reason why behind that is if you got the big brain plays like me, you'll notice that obviously when you get wiped, a significant factor behind those closer matches was likely because players noticed less risk during fights. I mean, even mentality side of things, right? It doesn't matter if they go all in. You're not going to be punished, essentially, right? So even in some cases, you notice that teams could actually intentionally wipe themselves to get a better respawn as well, which is obviously another way to think about it. Is another interesting aspect, because when you wipe, you actually have 3 players who have a free cam. They can go around the map and they can actually spot where you are as a player. So if you do it at the right time, for example, let's say if there was roughly like 7 seconds after the cash out, you all jumped off the map to wipe, and then you wait for that 7 seconds to end, you go for the respawn, you then have a third person perspective on where every single player is. You can assign each player to look around, and that's very strong. I remember I had this situation happen to me a few times when I was actually in 2nd place, and we noticed that, you know, if we were getting third party by a team in 3rd place near the end of the game, no wipe penalty for them means that we kind of save ourselves from losing out on $1,500, as long as obviously they don't steal the final cash out. So for example, you could manipulate the game in a way that avoids combat, and I feel like Embark didn't want it to go down that path. So obviously don't forget, that new $500 per elimination reward is actually very damn valuable. But when you're wiping yourself against, let's say, a team looking last minute to win, let's say a cash out, for example, with no risk, again, it just takes the fights away, a little bit unfun as someone avoiding it completely. Overall with this section, though, I do agree with Embark's decision to add in a 10% wipe. I feel like I said at the time that was pretty fair. I said maybe even 15%, but obviously with the data here that we can actually see now, you know, sure, obviously sometimes it feels like you're hardly being affected by it, but it can lead to some very fun last minute scenarios in matches without needing to rely on the cash out for being the objective. So basically, if you're watching right now wondering, you know, in simple terms, right, with the changes to cash out so far, everything that we've just discussed, data-wise, Embark is showing us that you'll have a fairer shot at success, I think. It's obviously going to be a little bit easier to learn once you start to understand the money situation, and you're not going to get punished as hard for making mistakes. And I think that's pretty damn good for the lower end of rank as well. And it doesn't really affect the higher end of rank, because if less people are being punished for making mistakes, well, they're hardly making mistakes anyway, so I think it's fine. Obviously, another one that you could all say to me as well was the actual transporting of the vault, right? I think that something that's very frustrating is that you put in all that effort for going to the vault station, taking the vault, and then bringing it to and depositing it in a cash out station. Well, you know, with the old system, you would only get the award, I think it was $1,000 or $2,000 for actually depositing that cash. Well, now there's a 30% bonus for it. You know, it's changed. And strategically, it's basically let the fights focus around the objectives instead. And again, that actually makes it more fun to watch from a viewer perspective too. And then obviously, based on the data, it's showing us that teams that focus on depositing the cash box earlier on in the rounds will actually find more success, regardless of the defending outcome. Obviously, sure, if you are defending the cash box, you will have to be successful in at least some ways. But defending has basically now switched to become, I guess, like a smarter strategy rather than, just only trying to deposit and then go and still cash outs, be faster on pacing, etc. Like, defending is the move statistically on average. Now, again, this is going to be completely different from the full player base to the top end player base. So again, if you're a top player and you're disagreeing with that, that's absolutely fine. But just remember, this is the overall, right? Metas obviously are different as you go up towards the level, and so does the data as well. So obviously now we'll kind of focus on the $500 per elimination change. That actually went up from $250, so the reward got doubled. Now, I really like this data set here, which basically shows the proof that eliminations aren't it when we're talking about strategies for the cash out mode. And a little bit of a trend we see here is that when a change has been pushed out from Embark, players look to find the most extreme scenario, and they sell that scenario as it is it, right? So I noticed that obviously when that change did happen, maybe I did mention it briefly before, but I didn't think it would take over. But players said that basically this new change, everyone would only just be focusing on getting eliminations. Well, data-wise, again, for the overall picture, okay, again, this could actually be different, obviously, if we go to the top level, but again, for the overall picture, of course, obviously, it can definitely help, but it's not every game overall where all players are going to try and drop 30 frags a game. So, despite the increase in kill rewards, it still shows that teams that primarily focus on objectives still win more often statistically as well. Again, there can be some very different scenarios as you go across the board. Obviously, you might have the teams that are playing the objectives, but they continuously get wiped, for example, 2 or 3 or 4 times with their stolen money. So, it's a very, very difficult situation, of course, but the scatter plot chart that you guys see right here, it shows that teams completing 5 or more objectives tend to win. So even if they don't rack up, let's say, a ton of kills, teams with high kill counts but fewer objectives tend to, struggle to secure victories as well. And what I mean by objectives is not necessarily going through and being successful with the cash out. We mean actually going towards the vault and then depositing the vault in the cash out as well. So it's kind of the best of both worlds there. Personally, I don't, understand why people aren't taking objectives if they're getting a ton of kills, right? Because you could assume that if you're getting more kills, then you're going to probably be wiping more players, which means that in return, you should have an easier task of actually stealing the objectives. But, maybe the respawn is too fast. That could be an area to look into. I don't think so. I think the respawn is actually pretty fine the way it is. But something I didn't see in the article was actually how smart players were based around their respawn coin economy. So I was a little bit, I didn't mind the article. I think it was really good. But obviously I wanted to kind of see how players dealt with the respawn coins as well. Because obviously as you go deeper into a tournament, the respawn coins are very valuable, right? You only have, I think, 4 to start off with when you first take your place in the arena. So if you use your respawn tokens and you get to, let's say, the semi-finals or final, then and you don't have any, that's a big problem. But I will say that regardless, I think this is actually, I was actually kind of happy to read this. This is like a little statement here from what Embark was saying. And they said that ultimately, this is the sort of dynamic we want to see in the finals. It has always been our goal to make an objective-based shooter where decisions and strategy matter just as much as your aim. So overall, we felt the improved cash per kill didn't seem to be damaging that experience, but it is one we'll continue to monitor to see how the meta evolves over time. And obviously, I think that if you have been here for a while, let's say that you've started playing, since, let's say, Close Beta 2 as an example, that they're swapping out and putting in new gear cogs for the engine that kind of makes up the finals as a game overall. And, this is something that sometimes I think, maybe you and me can agree respectfully, sometimes other studios take years to actually implement these changes, and Embark are moving super, super quick with things like this. And something that I hope that you'll learn after watching this video is that Embark are actually moving very smart. They're moving very strategically in terms of making sure each thing they arrive at and work on is mastered. before then moving on to the next thing unless it's absolutely needed. Like, for example, sure, they can go over and work on a little bit of the ranked changes like they did in Season 2. Obviously, it wasn't great, but they didn't say that was the end goal, right? They still said they needed to make changes to it, so they're sticking to that. But, you know, they went to it a little bit, did that work, then they went back and did the gadgets and weapons and new map for Season 2. So, obviously, this is actually pretty damn insane. Obviously, you guys know that I don't keep embarking bias despite how awesome they are. I do like to be honest and kind of say everything how it is. But, you know, the actual execution of adding this new ranked mode, for example, might need some more changes to it, or it might not be it. Or it may not work. But based on what, you know, I have spoken to the devs behind the scenes when I was out there in San Diego, I think this is it. I really think that this is the final point for ranked, and it's about to be mastered before moving on to the next thing. Sure, it might need a little bit of adjustments, of course. Maybe the MMR is a little bit weird. You know, they'll have to find that out. They can only find that out when they do this on scale. But, you know, I think I'm gonna be really excited to see, you know, where that takes us along the journey. Speaking of San Diego, I do have the vlog in production as well. It's kind of like a huge movie thing that I'm doing. You know, I'm just showcasing my experience of actually being behind the scenes with the devs, checking out America, showing you guys what I get up to when I'm here in the UK. You know, I can't wait to show you once it's done. I've put quite a lot of effort into it, and it's looking really fun. I'm actually really excited. I'll also be doing a stream marathon as well, so I'll be streaming the finals non-stop starting from the launch day. So it's this Thursday all the way to Sunday. So I'm going to be streaming for 4 days straight, and I've actually got some plans to show some special guests during the time, some guests that are absolute titans in the industry if it all works out. So I hope it does, because wow, it is going to be the most insane stream. So if you guys want to make sure that you check out me on launch day, of course, I'm going to be pulling off some content for you. We'll do a little bit of cash out grinding, of course, as well. We'll check out the more new Season 4 stuff in detail as well. So that's pretty much it, guys. Again, until then, thank you all so much for being here and giving me all the support. Thank you guys for making, you know, just checking to see if I got home safe. That's absolutely, that's actually, you know, crazy from you guys. I hope I made you proud, of course, as well. As always, my name's THiiXY, and I'll see you on the podium.